Yo guys, what's up? Been playing a lot of Direct Strike. This is a ranking list where I'm basically gonna be talking about every time you get offered a unit pick in your draft, which of those units is best for its pick tier. So you've got, in the first part of the draft, you are offered a selection of units where you're combining 3 different units together. And in those 3 units, there will be a tier 1 melee, there'll be a tier 1 ranged, and there'll be a tier 1 caster. So whether the caster is more important as a pick or whether the melee is more important as a pick, which one should you focus most on when you see a palatable and an unpalatable pick, I'm not 100% sure on yet, but I've got a pretty strong idea about which of the specific units within their own pick slot are the best. So hopefully with this list, I can give you a little bit of an explanation about what I like in each unit, why I think they're good, and how to look for some synergies. It's going to be a pretty light discussion of the units. Just want to kind of help people that have been playing Direct Strike to understand the picks a little bit more and how you should be using each unit just a bit. All right, so your tier 1 melee pick is going to be between the Grunt, the Footman, the Huntress, and the Ghoul. So what you should know is that the Huntress is a ranged unit, has about 250 range. And that means that anytime you pick it with a melee hero, the melee hero is very soon going to be in front. And the only melee heroes that can survive that are Warden because of Blink and Paladin because of Divine Shield. Other melee heroes should be taken with extreme caution in front of a Huntress tier 1 frontline, as the risk is that your hero will die even if you end up winning the fight and therefore claiming map control and getting that bonus gold from going over the middle line. Generally, you might feel more comfortable going with a ranged hero. Another hero that kind of works as a frontline for Huntress is the Blade Master. Blade Master goes in front and then can use Mirror Image and Windwalk together to add a little bit of deflection as well, so that any piercing attacks that an opponent has, which deal bonus damage to the unarmored type of a Huntress, will at least initially be deflected by hero armor as the hero is in front, and then it will slowly spread out to different Huntresses when the hero becomes untargetable, either because of Windwalk, Mirror Image, Divine Shield, Blink, or Death, right? So now different Huntresses are going to be attacked. It's going to make them a lot more survivable. But generally, I'll aim to do a ranged hero with Huntresses. Huntresses have a bunch of nice advantages. They have a bouncing attack. They also have a normal attack damage, which bounces. This means that they can be pretty good in the late game once they stand behind like a large tank like the Tauren, the Abomination, or the Mountain Giant, or the Knight. They are standing at range, so they occupy a different dimension in the fight. They do not clamor for space with tier 3 frontline, and that's pretty nice. But overall, I have found Huntress to be a little vulnerable because of their armor type, and usually you need to lean into them quite heavily in order to make them feel good. For example, 2 Huntresses, which you can pump out on the first wave, will lose to 2 Grunts, they'll lose to 4 Footmen, and they'll lose to 5 Ghouls. But roughly the same amount of money goes into them, or at least that's how many units player red and blue can fit out on the first wave if you don't make a hero, you don't make a gold mine, and you just make tier 1 melee. And so when I'm blue or red, my current understanding is that I should make a gold mine regardless, and I'm basically forfeiting the first wave. That means me and my team aren't going to be getting that bonus mid gold for some period of time because I know 2 Huntress doesn't beat anyone else. So it has the weakest first wave, but then from like the second wave onwards, it can claim some domination. So I don't hate the Huntress, at least it's not the Ghoul. The Ghoul, as a level 2 XP unit, it gives 40 XP when it's killed, so does the Footman. Huntress gives 60 and Grunt gives 60 XP. But the Ghoul has 165 life and 0 armor. And the Footman has 200 plus life and 2 armor. So it is a very easy kill for Lightning Shield Shamans, heroes with splash damage. For Grunts, for Huntress, you cannot mass produce Ghouls, even against someone that doesn't have splash damage hero or doesn't have Shamans. You can't mass produce Ghouls and win out against Grunts or Huntresses. You just lose that matchup. So I find Ghouls a very ephemeral advantage. They're only able to win a couple of waves at the most, and then they're really just an XP bonus for an opponent. You're going to end up losing the lane, and you're going to have to tech to tier 2 and hope that you got some strong picks in your draft in tier 2. Overall, I just don't love them. I think they're weak. Footmen are quite nice. They get the defense upgrade. Unlike in Warcraft Melee, they don't reflect damage from piercing attacks, but they do turn on defend and then take half damage from piercing attacks. And that's pretty bloody valuable. That's really nice. You can win a bunch of matchups having Footman as part of your opening draft, so they kind of remain useful for most of the game. Ghouls, I generally sell them once I get to tier 2 and I get my Breaker tank or Raider tank, but yeah, I end up selling them because I want to stop donating XP. But Grunts, Footman, Huntress kind of remain useful most of the game. Grunts, by far the best, in my opinion. They are very strong. The 2 Grunts win against 2 Huntresses. They will lose to 4 Footies and 5 Ghouls, but then every wave afterwards, they're super valuable. You can lean into these a lot. You can give them upgrades. They're less vulnerable to splash damage spells from heroes. They're less vulnerable to lightning shield. They do really good damage. They're tanky. They get a tier 2 upgrade that makes them deal 15% more damage and get like 6% more life. Yeah, I like them a lot. So anytime I'm looking at my draft opening and it says like, hey, you got a Grunt, you got a Rifle and a Banshee in your opening card, I may not like the Banshee that much, but I'm happy with the Grunt, so they are my most preferred. For the slot 2 list, the Headhunter, Rifle, Archer and Fiend, I think these are the best. Headhunter, then Rifle, then Archer, then Fiend. Why? Headhunters have 450 range, and so they stand pretty nearby the front line. It makes them more vulnerable to spells, but their damage output once they become a Berserker is really good. It's really, really good, right? They get the bonus attack speed at tier 3. When they turn it on, they go like, oh, whoa, 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 and then they're attacking fast. Their spear's on fire and everything. It's really nice. They're pretty cheap. They're short range, which does mean that they quickly draw aggro from enemy air. If the enemy has Wyverns, Frostworms, Chimaera, Gryphons, when they see the Headhunter attack, they're gonna attack him. And then he's gonna attack them back when possible. Basically, the Headhunter will attack them back if they are closer to him than the enemy front line is. So there are some weaknesses where Zerkers can get blown up by enemy air without them firing back, but at the same time, they will get attacked before your caster line of doctors, shamans, etc. gets attacked, and that can be pretty nice. But overall, I think the main reason they're good is just because they have really high attack damage and they're pretty cheap. Rifleman has less damage than the Berserker, but does stand at 600 range. That means they're not outranged by any enemy air. Chimaera and Frostworm have 450 range, Wyvern is 550, Gryphon is 500 I believe, the Hyppogryph Rider is 600, and the Bat has been put at 500 or 600, I think 600 as well. And so Rifle doesn't get outranged by anybody. That means if they're attacking him, he's most likely going to be hitting them back, unless, you know, there's an Abomination next to him. They have good health, you know, pretty good health. They just do good damage. They get a nice range upgrade going from 400 to 600 at tier 2. And I think they're the best tier 2 range. It's before archers get their marksmanship. It's before headhunters get their Zerker upgrade. At tier 2, they're great. So for a like big tier 2 centric play where you play tempo and you claim map control, kill the tower, they're great. Now, archers can do really good damage. They stand outside of enemy range because they can get up to 700 range. They start with 500. They are very costly though. This one is 155 gold, Rifle is 160, Archer's 170 gold. That's very expensive in my opinion. She does not do more damage than a Zerker. She does do so from further away, and that means she's less likely to get attacked by enemy air, which can be a double-sided sword. Sometimes you want it to happen. So with the Archer standing so far back, and with how slow her projectile travels, there's a lower chance that she draws aggro from a Chimaera or Frostworm immediately, and that means there's a higher chance the Chimaera or Frostworm will attack your front line like Grunts, Taurens, Abominations with 1 or 2 auto attacks before moving over to try and get to the Archer. Even if the Archer draws aggro, they're not going to usually attack the Archer first. They'll first go for the hero, as unit AI in Direct Strike in Warcraft 3, when given free reign, it generally seeks out units that can kill you. So the Frostworm will ignore a Knight because Knight cannot kill the Frostworm. But when the ranged units shoot, the Frostworm sees a threat and will target the nearest threat to himself, not to the player that's controlling him. And so the Worms, the Wyverns, the Chimaera, they will kill the hero first. This could be a melee hero with an orb, or it could be a ranged hero at 600 range. This can be a good or bad thing depending on how you're playing the game, what you want to have happen with your archers. Also, Archer projectile is quite slow. Headhunter projectile is fast. Rifle is instant. Archer projectile is slow. She shoots from afar, and that means that there is a good chance of overkilling. Something may already be dead, but the projectile already traveled and she's reloading her bow. That's true for Fiend as well. Fiend attacks very slowly as well. This can be an advantage in one-on-one melee because a Lich with a Corruption Orb hits fairly quickly, and then all the Fiend attacks will benefit from the armor debuff that Corruption has done. But in direct strike, it's not so much about target firing, focus firing, killing a single unit, then moving to the next, like it is in one-on-one melee, and that actually makes Fiends more of a disadvantage than an advantage. Additionally, Fiends are very expensive at 195 gold. They also take up more formational space in your formation, so sometimes it can be harder to fit good positioning, especially as the game goes on and you start having more units on the field. There's a twofold problem with Fiends. So the way that Fiends kill enemy air is via a web upgrade, which is available from tier 1. The Fiend will detect an enemy air unit in its vicinity, maybe at around 800 range, which is more range than it has as an attack radius, and that means that it will attempt to walk forward in order to ensnare and web the enemy air unit. This moves the Fiend out of location, it moves it out of position, possibly into Taurens, just to web the enemy air unit. This is an undesirable outcome. It happens automatically, and that's just how the AI works, right? But it means that Fiends occasionally stand in terrible spots, they lose out on attack timing, where they're moving, and sometimes they can get blocked and they won't do it right, etc. The second downside of the way that their particular brand of AI works is that, like I said, enemy air units target units that threaten them, and web is not seen as one. Fiend can only attack against ground units, and it does counter air by bringing them to the ground. But at no point is a Fiend a higher attack priority for Chimaera than a Knight, which is true for the Rifle and the Zerker. The Chimaera treats the Fiend the same as a Knight, and that means if the Knight is nearer, which it will be, the Chimaera will attack the Knight. And the Fiend does not draw aggro, even though Fiends with medium armor take reduced damage from magic damage, and the Knight with heavy armor takes double damage from magic damage. So now the very thing you don't want to have happen, which is that the enemy heavy air with magic damage destroys your Knights and Taurens, can happen. The Fiend is not a bro in drawing aggro, and this is a major downside. It means that you need other units that are on the ground to draw aggro from the Chimaera just so it doesn't incinerate your front line. What other air units can attack a Chimaera and can be attacked by them? Not a Dryad, magic immune. It will be the doctors, the priests, the statues, heroes. These things die very easily to Chimeras and do not form much of a threat against them. So that can be really gnarly, and then having Fiends doesn't allow me to manipulate the enemy air in a way that my important units can stay alive. The third downside about web is that the moment that you web an enemy air unit, the way that the Warcraft 3 AI generally works, and this is true in all of Warcraft, not just, this custom map, is that once the Frostworm is webbed, the attack priority of all units becomes identical, except for magic immunes. Because the worm cannot attack magic immunes, it won't consider them at all as an attack prio, right? But suddenly, when the worm is webbed by an enemy Fiend, the Knight is nearer, and the Knight can now attack a worm, and the Fiend can also attack a worm, but the Knight is nearer, so it will attack the Knight. Not only might it be out of range of the Fiend and can literally not reach the Fiend, but additionally the Knight is closer even if the Fiend is near enough. So now you get that bad outcome again where the enemy heavy air gets to enjoy double damage, and they get to fulfill the role that everybody wish they would fulfill, but they don't because of the way AI works, which is part of the charm of direct strike. So only go Fiends in specific scenarios. If you have a mountain giant frontline, it's okay to go Fiends, because mountain giants also have medium armor. That means they also take reduced damage from wyverns, from worms, from Chimaera, from griffins. So then now you're not disadvantaging your frontline, basically screwing over your own frontline. Additionally, Fiends are pretty good together with Chimaera. Chimaera can only attack ground, so Chimaera loses to worms 1-1. But Chimaeras attack ground really well, perhaps better than Frostworm. And the Frostworm gets other advantage, such as it slows enemies and it can also hit air. So if you web enemy air, now Chimeras can attack Frostworms. It's pretty damn sick. So Fiends have some cool synergies, but your whole playstyle, your whole strategy has to think and play differently. And therefore I value these the least in this list. For the third slot, you've got Shaman, Dryad, Banshee, and Sork. We have to point out the obvious. Shamans and Dryads have a Dispel magic, Abolish magic, and Purge. This can help you to throttle the power of Treants on Keeper of the Grove, Feral Spirits on Farseer, Black Arrow, all those gnarly buffs like Lightning Shield against your Ghouls, your Footmen, or your Grunts. All those things that can happen early game that can help someone win the lane against their lane opponent. Shaman with Purge and Dryad with Abolish Magic can deal with that. Dryads, should also be pointed out, are magic immunes, and therefore they can resist a whole bevy of other heroes as well, such as Lich with Frost Nova, Blood Mage with Flame Strike. Dryads destroy Huntresses, right? They help to throttle grunt value a little bit. So some of these, the best slot, the third best slot for melee, Dryads do very well against them. Maybe Dryad is the best, actually, and Shaman the third, especially for the early game, and early game matters quite a bit. So, in my opinion, this is maybe the gold role. If it offers you Grunt, Headhunter, and Dryad, that might be the best. But Shaman also has a lot of value in Bloodlust. It's one of the best buffs that you can get in the game. You get bonus movement speed and attack speed for your army. It is a tier 3 upgrade though, and I do think that this map enjoys a lot of momentum, in that an early good game can basically snowball you the win. I think it's harder to come back than to close out an advantageous situation. So perhaps Dryad is actually better just because of the value of the early game. And I think I look a lot at the Shaman and I think of the potential in the late game of Bloodlust and so on, but you may not even get there. Maybe by the time you get to tier 3, you've already kind of lost the game. And yeah, occasionally you'll make a comeback. And you can try to go to tier 3 and maybe you'll eventually do like a big swing back. I think Dryad gives better early game, and I think early game matters more than late game even. Because early game advantage, you can make extra gold mines. Second mine, third mine, and then, you'll have a better army eventually. I think heroes actually provide a really large power swing in this game, more even than I previously assumed. The difference between having a Lich or not a Lich, I think is really great. So yeah, if you're against Lich and you've got Shaman, Footman, Archer, you're not happy. All three of those get Frost Nova out of the wazoo. And now you have to go to tier 2. Like Footman, Archer, Shaman is kind of an average pick. You see my tier list, right? So you got the second best, and third best. That's average, that's okay. But you have these 3 units against Frost Nova, Footman, Archer, Shaman. Wow, you're gonna have a really hard time at tier 1. And you better hope you pick some momentum-based tier 2 that aren't just support units for your tier 3 and tier 1. So, this is my first 3 picks. I prepared them. Now let's go to the next one. Each slot represents 4 picks, 1 from every race. Slot 4, which is offered together with 5 and 6, represents Gargoyle, Priest, Hippogryph, and Doctor. Each of these have their own strengths, each 4 of them. Let's start with presumably, my least favorite, the Hippogryph. So basically what the Hippogryph does, it is an anti-air unit that can only attack air. And there's a great power in this, and there's some cool tricks in this. Because it only attacks air, it can't get distracted by mountain giants. It can't get distracted and baited into attacking the enemy backline like rifles and berserkers. You make a Wyvern, you want the Wyvern to kill enemy Banshees? No, it's going to engage the 10 berserkers that are in a line, and then it will die in 1 second, right? Hippo does what it needs to do. And another great thing is, because the Hippo cannot attack ground, none of these ranged units take any liking to attacking the Hippo. Because the Hippo is no threat to the Berserker will only attack the Hippo if there's literally nothing else available anymore. There could be 1,000 units and Hippo will be the 1,000th unit to attack, and that means that Berserkers that are in melee are counter to Hippogryphs to help protect a Chimaera or a Gryphon do not fulfill that purpose here. Only dedicated anti-air units will help to deal with the Hippogryph. And of course, to the Frostworm and the Gryphon and the Wyvern, Hippo is a threat, so they will start fighting with the Hippo. And the Hippo is a 65 gold unarmored, swarm unit that will swarm in with a melee attack. Obviously, it's not going to win one-on-one against any air unit, because it's only 65 gold. And the Wyvern, 260. Frostworm, 435. So you're going to need quite a few hippos to deal with threats. But I find them incredibly useful to have such a narrow focus and in how they're ignored by all the rest of the AI. There comes in the second use for hippogriffs as well. If you make hippos for fighting a particular player, but that player has no air anymore, then the hippo will fly past them and will get completely ignored, provided enough of the hippo player's army have already engaged the enemy army. So the hippo will fly past the initial army. It will then fly right over the second player army that has a wave coming up somewhere deeper in the lane. This will make all the berserkers, shamans, etc. attack the hippogriff army, but all the melee, they'll keep marching. So the hippo sometimes has a destabilizing anti-positioning effect on an enemy wave where their melee line feeds into the next player all by themselves without the benefit of the heroes, the range, the casters, the air, etc. who are busy, yes, getting some free kills on the hippogriffs, but now you've created this big positional discrepancy. And so hippos have this cool position trick abuse that you can kind of do with them. So I do think they're useful, and I do look for this unit to be picked. And in fact, I don't think they're the worst. I think they are important. They are my third favorite pick. Garg is my second, Priest is my most, and Witch Doctor is my fourth. Why did I pick like this? So let's talk about the Gargoyle. The Gargoyle has a prioritize anti-air mechanic. He uses a ranged attack against ground, and he uses a ranged attack against air as well in this mode. Not in melee, right? But in this mode. And if he has equal distance to enemy air and ground, he will prefer to use his anti-air attack. In fact, he will travel a bit past ground if he detects enemy air nearby. And that is almost just as useful as hippos, but because he does have the ability to attack ground, he will take more punishment from enemy rifles and headhunters, provided the proximity works if they're close enough to each other. Nonetheless, I find Gargs really useful for taking out enemy air and not being entirely useless when there is no enemy air. They can still help attack ground as well. I think Gargoyle is quite a strong anti-air unit, and in fact is probably one of my favorite anti-air units. All the anti-air units are, of course, Fiend. And I talk about dedicated anti-air, meaning when you have them, they will deal with the air in some way. Zerker's Rifle Archer will not, but Fiend will because of web. Hippo will, because they can only attack air. Gargs prioritize air. Dragonhawks will shackle air. Batriders will explode on air. And Talons will turn into a crow and attack air. Flying machines will attack air. And then raiders can ensnare as well. So those are all the dedicated anti-air. And then wyverns and destroyers are okay with attacking air, right? Yes, provided that they are the nearest. And the siege tank has a prioritized anti-air ability as well called Barrage. So among all of those, I think each have their own strengths, but I think Garg is one of the best. Priests, love them a lot. They represent a huge power spike when you get to tier 2. They're kind of a reason to get to tier 2 and then actually invest, rather than just having it be a pit stop for tier 3. They have healing, they have dispel, they have inner fire, which gives 5 armor and 10% damage. It's just a great all-purpose buff that you can give to everybody. The healing is useful. They do have a couple of counters. Disease Cloud is very annoying for priests because they keep giving each other 4 HP heals when really there are other people to heal for the full amount of 25. Their dispel isn't as large of an area as walkers, and it's not as easy for them to reach all kinds of areas to dispel like it is for the destroyer. But these are the 3 area of effect dispellers: priest, walker, and destroyer. And priests are lovely to get a whole bunch from pretty early and to get that dispel out. All 3 of their spells are really, really useful. The Witch Doctor, potentially very good. They will put a sentry down if they know there's an enemy invisible unit. They just know, right? The game knows, they know, they put a sentry down. They'll put a stasis ward down at the kind of at the back of your army every time. No matter really how you seem to position doctors, they're not going to stasis in front. It's always kind of at the back. So you should see Witch Doctors kind of as they're not really going to help you that much, but they may help your opponent. They may help your ally. because after your army gets wiped, the stasis is still there, and then the enemy walks into the stasis. And then your ally can maybe have an advantage. They're a stalling unit. They also put down a healing ward in roughly the same spot, again to the back of your army. And while healing wards potentially are quite strong, they do percentage-based healing. Units in direct strike have less health on average than in melee, and so the healing of healing ward is also less, because it's percentage-based, right? It's decent amount of healing, but it usually doesn't affect your whole army. Your melee is usually already out of range of the healing ward by the time they place it. It will affect your backline and your wyverns, but it won't affect your Taurens and your mountain giants. So it's not really like that useful usually, but it may greatly help your ally that comes in that will fight slightly closer around the healing ward. So the Witch Doctors really are support units to your allies, and for yourself they don't do that much. And in fact, the last 5 times I went Witch Doctors, enemies then made Spellbreakers, they got control magic, and then they steal my stasis ward and my healing ward. And as much as I hate that in one-on-one melee, I hate it here as well, and it just makes me not want to make doctors anymore. I hate this unit so much in this mode, so I tend to avoid them at all costs. I much rather have dedicated anti-air or my own form of dispel, healing, and inner fire. Next up, for slot number 5, we've got 4 contenders: Walker, Spellbreaker, Druid of the Claw, and Necromancer. Let's first talk about buffs. So far we've had the Bloodlust buff, the Inner Fire buff. We also of course have Curse and Slow debuff and the Polymorph debuff. I guess I didn't talk enough also about the Banshee and the Sorceress. Banshee Curse can be useful early game in that it can help you to throttle the enemy power of Grunts and Huntresses. Anti-Magic Shell can be just as useful as what Dryad supply, in the sense that you can put a lot of AMS on your units, which can protect you from Frost Nova, Impale, Flame Strike, etc. I do like the Banshee quite a bit for that. They also have a very good tier 3 purpose, where they can insta-possess enemy heavy ground, like Knights, Taurens, and Abominations. I do think the Banshee is strong. I tend to see them as a very interesting counter unit, but with Shaman and Dryad, I have a kind of guarantee of value for myself that doesn't rely on an opponent. That's why I don't think Banshee is bad, but I won't pick it as often as Shaman and Dryad. Sorceress Invisibility is really cool because in this, unlike in one-on-one melee, Invis allows you to keep fighting without revealing yourself. So it's actually a super strong Invis. It will only do so for a few seconds, but it's super strong because it makes enemies stop focus firing the unit that's dropping low. However, there's a 140 gold item in the shop called the Gem of True Sight, and so if an opponent gets that after the first time you use invisibility successfully, it's not going to do anything anymore. You might as well just turn it off. And while slow is a pretty okay buff, it does a 25% attack rate debuff, it does like 60% movement speed slow. It's not as strong as Curse, which is 33% miss chance, less damage decrease. And overall, I just don't find Sorceresses worth the 155 gold I think they cost to really make a lot of. They maybe win you one round with Invis. If you have Sorceresses with Huntress, you can say like, okay, cool, my Mountain King in front is going to die first because it's in front of Huntresses. But here's my Sorceress, Invis on the Mountain King. And you win one round. Now they have to buy Gem of True Sight. You invested 100 in Invis. You invested 155x the amount of Sorks in Sorks. They invested 140 in a gem, and now you've got a bunch of, tiny debuffing, small magic damage units. Yeah, I don't like it all that much. Next, Walker, Breaker, Druid of the Claw, Necro. Necro offers Unholy Frenzy, 70% attack speed buff, very strong DPS increase, but it only lasts 20 seconds. It will cast the moment your army spawns with a 5 or 10 second cooldown. And it has a damage decay as well, so it does like 4 damage per second. That means that if you are spawning at your fort and you have Unholy Frenzy on, by the time you get to the enemy fort, the frenzy will first of all be finished. It's not there anymore because 20 seconds has passed. That's about how long it takes to walk across the lane. And your Necro that casts it on himself is now 10% life. And you got nothing out of it, right? So every single round, you have to turn off Unholy Frenzy, wait till you get to your tower, then turn it on, and then you fight in the middle. If you fight at enemy fort, you want to maybe activate it right past your own tower, and so that you still have some frenzy, and so you can get the cooldown going, and so you can have multiple frenzies on your army. And if you're fighting near your own fort, well, then you never have to turn it off, right? And so it is a cool spell, but it has a bunch of downsides. Statues that have healing activated will start immediately lagging behind because they start healing the frenzy decay. Priests will start lagging behind because they start healing the frenzy decay. And so there's all kinds of like extra micro you need to do. It's not an easy unit to use optimally. Then they also have the Raise Dead. Necromancer with Raise Dead is one of the most useful tier 2 tempo plays that you can have. Raising a lot of skeletons that early can be super strong. If your opponent doesn't have Walker or Priest, they're going to have trouble to deal with large skeleton armies. Necros are absolutely a unit to be reckoned with at tier 2. And they get great upgrade at tier 3 where they get skeletal mages, which makes half of those skeletons ranged, which have a little bit more health. They have ranged and piercing, and they're harder to dispel for enemy dispellers because it's just too far back. So I do think Necro is a super useful unit. I like it quite a bit. The Druid of the Claw, he does Roar, Rejuvenate, and becomes a bear form eventually. Once he becomes bear form, if you go all the way to researching that, he never goes out of bear form again. He'll never use his mana pool again, and he doesn't get the Mark of the Claw upgrade where he's allowed to roar while in bear form. So I'm not hugely fond of the Druid of the Claw upgrade. When you get it, they will do a roar, then they do a self rejuvenate or one rejuvenates on an ally, but the moment they get attacked, they insta transform into a bear and all the other spells are done. There are some downsides in that. Of course, it's all microed for you, so you can't demand that much. It's not like one-on-one melee. And the Druid of the Claw has a heavy armor in whatever form he's in. He's much stronger when he's a bear than when he's a druid. He's a tiny tank at tier 2 without the bear form, and at tier 3 if you upgrade it, he becomes a bit better of a tank, but is still not great. But he does do good damage, and he's best when fighting from behind mountain giants, Taurens, Aboms, Knights, etc. He doesn't want to be the main contact with the opponent. He wants to arrive a little later, right after your real front line. And then he does add some cool things, like a Rejuvenate. That's a bit of a melee hero enabler. Sending your druids like 5 paces back and having your melee hero go in first, having the Druids of the Claw come in, they're going to give him a rejuvenation most likely, if you're lucky. So I do think there's value for these in all of their forms, but the most likely form for you to use the Druid of the Claw is to buy exactly one and to roar from the middle of your army. Maybe in the super late game you get 2 to be at the opposite ends of your grid, so that you can roar literally the whole army and not miss like the perimeter units. And that's a 25% damage increase. It only costs 200 gold to make one druid, and you don't need any upgrades to get the roar. That is such an amazingly valuable power spike that you can get to tier 2 immediately, or you can get it a little bit after, that I value this unit quite highly. I like him a lot as a buff. And because he's so low investment, unlike the Necromancer, I think I might actually value him higher than the Necro. I'm not super confident about this pick, but I think I like him more than the Necro. I think he's my second favorite, the Walker my favorite, Breaker third, Necro third actually, and Breaker last. Now, this is pretty controversial because I actually think that all of them, like I'm definitely ordering them by rank here. Rank 1, rank 2, rank 3, rank 4 per slot. But I would be super comfortable ranking it like this. I think this is the actual value for these 4. Walker brings Dispel, which is nice. In fact, he's not my favorite Dispel, right? I think he's my least favorite Dispel. Maybe this is even the ranking, but honestly, I don't think the difference between them is that big. I just wanted to have an opportunity to talk to you about how to use every unit, and we still need to complete that for the Breaker and Walker. So let's keep talking about that. The Spellbreaker is a short range, medium armor frontliner. He's particularly good at resisting piercing damage from this list right here. He will be ignored by enemy air, so you can just ignore that part entirely. He's going to be hit either by tier 1 frontline, tier 3 frontline, mortar teams and the like, or by enemy piercing. And he does best against, things like Demolisher and piercing because medium takes reduced damage. They will steal buffs, which is nice. If you don't have Inner Fire and Bloodlust, why don't you take the enemy Inner Fire and Bloodlust? The tier 3 upgrade with Control Magic can steal enemy Heal Ward and Stasis, so you have a nice counter there. against Witch Doctors, and they can also steal Beastmaster summons, Farseer summon, Water Elemental, etc. Now the value of summons in the late game is usually quite low, so it's going to be rare that you'll use a tier 3 control magic to counter a first hero pick from an opponent, but if they're still using summons, you know, that's something you can steal. And they do mana burn. They're pretty damn good against enemy melee heroes, and they're also magic immune, which means they're not vulnerable to flame strike, etc, etc. I like breakers when I open with Huntresses or Ghouls, because I know these are relatively unreliable tank units. They are frontline, yes, but are they really a tank? And Breaker can kind of reprise that role as well. Let's talk finally about the Walker. Spirit Link is kind of a weird buff that doesn't do as much as some of the others. It's a damage spread. I have not gotten like a lot of advantage from it. I find Spirit Link weird to use a little bit because basically the way that buffs and debuffs interact in Direct Strike. So what does it take for my units to perform a dispel of debuffs on myself? They need to have debuffs, and then the AI will instruct them to do a dispel to remove the debuff. What does it take for the enemy army to have a buff? And then they will do a dispel. The moment it gets weird is when you're applying a debuff with slow and curse, and you're doing an agnostic dispel on an enemy to remove their inner fire and bloodlust. Because you put curse and slow, I have found that my units often do not want to dispel enemy bloodlust and inner fire, because that would mean we're removing our own curse and slow. And generally the units are trying not to self-sabotage your own effects. The same problem if I put Spirit Link on myself. If I have Spirit Link on and my walkers start doing Spirit Link on myself, but the enemy does slow on me and there are enemy skeletons in my front line and so on, he may not remove those things because he doesn't want to remove his own Spirit Link. And so I find like weak buffs and weak debuffs to be debilitating to my Dispeller's ability and willingness to remove those buffs and debuffs. So I do find it a bit tricky to use Link because, yeah, I don't value it that much when I look at what it does, when I see how many links they do and how much it's actually postponing the death of the first unit. I didn't find it to be that strong. They do bring a big dispel, and they also enable Tauren frontline at tier 3, so that can be pretty sweet. Which one is the best among all these? I actually think Druid and Necro are the best together, and then Breaker and then Walker, now that I think about it. This is, I think, my prio list. But the most important thing to remember is that I like all 4 of them. So I'll just kind of group it like this. I like that Druid is a low investment. I like that Necro is a tier 2 tempo option. I like Breaker being a potential tank frontline and some, you know, spellcaster stealer guy. And I like Walkers as well because it's a form of dispel. I think this is the most equal tier of value so far. Then for the 6th slot, you've got the Statue, the Raider, the Flying Machine, and the Talon. Statue, I think, by far is the best. No contest. It does 8 units simultaneous healing, 8 units simultaneous mana. So it's basically doing 16 things at the same time, giving health and mana. It is one of the most prominent stacking units, which means that it gets left behind by the first player and picked up by the second. So good, so good. It does need a lot of micro. Because if you wanted to catch up and heal your front line, you must disable its buffs until it catches up and starts doing auto attacks at 600 range from the enemy front line, and then you can turn it on again. It needs micro, but even if you don't micro it at all, it will just join your ally, which is quite nice. I think it's the best by far. Next, second best, no doubt. This is such a clear list. Druid of the Talon. Druid of the Talon is one of the best dedicated anti-air units. I know it looks wonky sometimes where they go up in the air and they come down, go up in the air and they come down again. But when it detects enemy air, it sends itself and a group of units around itself, it sends an impulse to fly in the air and start attacking the air. If the enemy unit then dies, it will go down again, and that creates the bugged behavior. But even with that, they are still incredibly cost efficient and effective at killing enemy air. They will annihilate Gryphons, Chimaera, Frostworm, Wyvern. The only thing they can't attack is the Destroyer, and they hate going up against siege tanks. Even when killing all these heavy air, siege tank can annihilate them. But siege tank may or may not be in range, because Talons do it from pretty far away. So it really depends how things go. But it's so nice to have this in your list, so you've got an answer to heavy air. All that you will need is also a way to deal with enemy destroyers, because they literally cannot attack destroyers. In one-on-one melee in 2024, Talons have been given a piercing type attack against air, which can attack destroyers, but in this mode they still have magic, which they used to have in the most of the history of Warcraft 3, and therefore cannot attack air. Then, next up, you've got the Raider and the Flying Machine. I like the Flying Machine third. I'm not going to say that I make them often. I usually have other answers in my draft to deal with enemy air, but again, I appreciate that they are dedicated anti-air and will ignore everything else and will therefore not be attacked by ground, and they will do their job of killing enemy air. My final preferred unit is Raider, my least favorite. I will never pick a draft of cards for the Raider, pretty much ever. They have all the same problems as the Fiend. Well, not exactly. Let's talk about it. Raider is a frontline unit that has similar survivability as the Grunt against certain attack types. He will take more damage from normal, but he will take less damage from magic and piercing. He will take normal damage from hero damage, just like the Grunt. And so really, Raider is just better against Sorceresses, Priests, Dryads, Headhunter, and Rifle, but he's less good against Grunt, Footman, Huntress, Ghoul, and Mountain Giant, Knight, Tauren, Abom. That sounds pretty good on paper. It sounds like you can weave in Raiders into your front line, and that maybe they will be the ones that take focus fire from enemy piercing. But in reality, Raiders just get so smashed by enemy frontline that the degree to which they take reduced damage from piercing usually doesn't feel that important. I hope I'm wrong and I fall in love with this unit one day. But so far I've never seen anyone use Raiders effectively, and they are in fact the reason that I lose every single time I make them. They have a secondary purpose and a tertiary purpose. The secondary is pillage. Whenever they auto attack an enemy tower or fort, you get 10 gold for every single auto attack. That's amazing, right? But it doesn't happen often enough because Raider armies don't win fights. So if I don't win a fight, then I'm not going to hit the tower. And if I'm winning the fight already, I'm already ahead. So they're a win more unit. And even when I'm winning and I'm getting to the tower repeatedly, the moment I add a Raider, I start losing, or I only get 1 or 2 hits on the tower. I've yet to see massive value. They are 10 gold cheaper than a Grunt. They have similar survivability against most targets, but they get smashed so hard by normal attacks that I tend to avoid them. For flying machines, you can research bombs on them, but be very careful to do this. Once you've researched it, you cannot unresearch it, you cannot disable it, and flying machines will suddenly be targeted by enemy ground. It does mean that flyings will stick back with your army, and they will stay with you when enemy has no more air. So they kill all the air, and then they'll start attacking ground. And then they stay with the army. And then they maybe kill more air from the enemy player that comes next afterwards. But this is very risky, because now they can be taunted by Mountain Giant, when before they could not be. Therefore, they may not be doing their role anymore of dedicated anti-air. So I prefer to not make these until the opponent has so much air that I can happily invest in flak cannon flyings just to win against a single player after they've overcommitted. Because any Warcraft player knows if you make enough flyings against anything except Batriders and siege tanks, you will eventually win the air battle. Even if they have like 10 worms and you have like 5 flyings, of course you're gonna lose, but eventually, with enough, you will crush the air battle because of flak cannon having splash. So I think they're a nice ace in the hole. They're a nice ace up the sleeves. Ace up the hole. Something like that. You know what I mean. Alright, next up, you will get a double selection card that will be a siege unit and it will be a specialist unit. So it's basically it's this siege unit and you'll be offered one of these 4. So the Meat Wagon, the Glaive Thrower, the Demolisher, the Mortar Team, and then the Faerie Dragon, the Kodo Beast, the Shade, and the Dragonhawk. My primary motivation is going to be pretty simple. I think the Kodo Beast is by far the best. You only need a single one in an army to give your entire army 10 to 20% bonus damage. As of today, 27 October 2024, Kodos have a tooltip error that says 5% attack damage, but it's actually 10, just like in one-on-one melee. And when you get the upgrade, it's 20%. It's amazing. You only need 1, so just like the Druid, it's a massive damage increase for your army for very cheap. And they are at 600 range, which means Kodos will die before archers when defending Chimaera. That's sad, but it means that Kodos will survive when protected by Headhunters, which is happy. You could even decide not to give archers improved bows so that they will protect the Kodo from enemy chimeras, griffins, and frostworms. Something to think about. And rifles can stand in front as well without long rifles, but they'll be 400. That's quite extremely close. So, Kodo buff. Cannot be dispelled, unlike other buffs. He can be possessed by a Banshee, but overall Kodo is amazing. If there is a Kodo in my pick card for slot 7 and 8, I always take it. The next up, Faerie Dragon. The second best unit on that tier. I will also pick for this. If I see Faerie and I don't see Kodo, I take Faerie. If I see Kodo and Faerie, I take Kodo. Then the next is Shade and Dragonhawk. Believe it or not, I believe the unit that cannot fight is the worst, and Dragonhawk is third. Third, the Dragonhawk, it does decent piercing damage. It's the worst air unit that can damage ground for its cast. It's 180 gold, does like 18 to 21 piercing, I think. It has aerial shackles that has the best effect on griffins, chimera, and frostworms. Can be pretty nice. Sometimes it ends up being quite good. I have found it difficult to find conditions where I like to pick the Dragonhawk and where he actually does something against worms and chimera. Usually what happens, he shackles the worm, he dies 5 seconds later, the worm is full life still, and then ends up destroying the fight. The fact that he stuns enemy air is cool. The fact that he's 2.5 times cheaper than a worm and a chimera is cool. But I think hawks are such a risky pick. They're not that reliable. They can get silenced, they can get killed by ground because they have the capability to attack ground. They may be targeted by ground, etc. And Shade. Shade can make money. If Shade goes over the middle line together with your army and you start earning money for your team by having the mid-control bonus, your whole army could die, your Shade remains on their side and keeps the money bonus. This is the main reason to have Shade. The second reason is the fact that he's invisible and has true sight, so that he can counter sorceresses, windwalk, he can see stasis and healing wards. Overall, those is kind of whatever. I'm not going to pick a unit in my draft to do those things, but it'll be a consolation prize otherwise. So which siege unit do I like the most? To be clear, I prioritize the secondary unit over the siege unit, but occasionally I'll be offered either Dragonhawk or Shade, and I'm thinking I'm most likely not picking either one of those. So let's decide which siege unit is better, and in those moments you may like to know my thoughts on which one is stronger. So I think Wagon is the best, then Demolisher, then Mortar, and then Glaive Thrower. Nice thing about Glaive, it's the cheapest, 220 gold. It has a vertical cleave where it hits something behind the first target it hits. It does tiny damage, so tiny, so small you can almost not see it. Glaive Thrower is a siege unit. I will say that it is a unit. That is what I can give to it. And that means that it can attack siege engine and it can attack enemy tower and fort. And it does so from the standard siege range of 800 in this mode. Not 1200 like in melee, 800. It will do negligible damage on grunts, on zerkers, but it can be okay against Dryad, Shaman, Banshee, Sork, Priest, Necro, Doctor, Walker. But it has to get to them and it has to attack the front line first, which it will do. So Glaive does indeterminable damage. Mortar Team, a little better. Again, tiny damage. I'm not excited about this unit. Only does 35 siege damage, which is so little. They cost 260, which is a little cheaper than the top 2 siege units. And the cool thing is, Mortar Team can receive both Bloodlust and Unholy Frenzy. So if you've picked Shaman or if you're picking Necromancer, Mortar Team goes up a bit in value. Suddenly their damage becomes more significant. All siege units can get Roar and Inner Fire, but only Mortar can also get Frenzy and Bloodlust, which is pretty cool. They can also be healed by priests and doctors, unlike the siege units that are mechanical. Third pick. Second pick, Demolisher. 300 gold gets Burning Oil. In 1-on-1 melee, Burning Oil does 6, and then 6, and then 3, and then 3, for a total of 18 damage. It does double that on every tick in this mode. And units have half-life or worse in this mode. So Burning Oil is so much stronger in this mode than what you're used to in normal 1-on-1 melee, if you've ever played that. It's about 4 times as good as you would judge based on 1-on-1 melee. That's strong, and it does so in an area. It adds a lot of damage per hit, and it does damage over time. It distracts enemy priests. It's just good. It's good. I like it. Then Wagon, my favorite. 4 damage per second for 20 seconds. Total 80 damage on everything it comes in contact with. And it lingers like a miasma that everyone walks through. They get diseased and sickly and despondent, and it's green and it's great. And it really weakens the enemy army that then meets your ally as well. It's like a fart in an elevator. You can't escape it, and it's awkward. So this is a 100 gold upgrade. This is a 50 gold upgrade. They're both super cheap for what they do. I love meat wagons for that reason. Disease Cloud is amazing. Burning Oil, amazing as well. Then we get to the next slot, the tier 3 melee. Mountain Giant, Tauren, Abom, and Knight. I think MG is the best. Tauren is second best, then Abomination, then Knight. It's pretty simple why. Mountain Giant takes less damage from enemy Pierce. They do take more damage from melee, but melee dies early and Mountain Giants persevere. They have Taunt, they have Resistant Skin, which means they cannot be possessed. Yeah, they can't be possessed. When they get Cycloned, it's briefer than on others. They're great. They do pretty good damage. They're very tanky. They get a Resistant Skin, which means the first 8 damage is ignored. It makes armor upgrades super valuable on them because they take even less damage from enemy grunts or headhunters, etc. And they taunt, which means they distract enemy chimeras and frostworms away from killing your backline, which is the main thing what chimera and frostworms do, is to engage and kill your backline because they ignore the melee, as melee are not a threat to them. Ironically, Mountain Giants can work against these units, but if I'm looking at a unit to kill Mountain Giants, I'm also looking at frostworms and chimera. It does keep frostworms and chimera out of the danger range, except if you're very pro. If you turn off Taunt to let your Mountain Giants be ignored by Frostworm Chimera, those Frostworm Chimera fly over the Mountain Giants to engage the Zerkers behind it, and then you turn on Taunt, now the Worms and Chimera are out of position. They're getting attacked by your piercing damage, but they're attacking the Mountain Giant. This is like the best of... But it requires a lot of micro, but it's there. I'm gonna use it. I'm 1720 MMR today. One day, I'll finally be happy at 2k plus MMR, right? Then suddenly all the troubles I have in this life, all the challenge, the frustration, it's not going to be there anymore. I'll finally be whole. I just need to get a little bit further in MMR, and when I get there, that will be part of my tricks. It'll be part of the builds that I do. I'll be taunting when the enemy air is over my Mountain Giant. Yeah, their taunt is super valuable. It can mess up a lot on the enemy's positioning. They're super tanky. Next best tanky unit, which is what you want. You want a tank. Tauren, 5 armor. Nice. The Tauren has 637 health. It does cost a pretty penny, 300 gold, but it's tanky. It's a lot of effective health, and if you also have the Walker card, you can revive them for a large portion of their health. There are some counters to that revival, like destroying their corpse with Siege or with Fire Incinerate, or, you know, there's Possession. Possession is a big counter to Taurens, but just standing by itself, Taurens are a great frontline, even without walkers. They also have Pulverize, which means they do pretty damn good damage to enemy frontline, and woe behold to any ranged units that get engaged by Taurens. They really thrive with buffs such as Inner Fire and Bloodlust and Frenzy. I like the Tauren quite a bit. Abomination spreads Disease Cloud. Just a solid tank, kind of middling in every stat, middling cost, middling survivability and armor, middling damage, but he spreads Disease Cloud, and I like that. I like to spread the plague, generally, just in games, because, you know, poison damage very good, especially my allies will enjoy it as well. Then there's Knights. Knights have an upgrade, Animal War Training. It costs 150. It also affects Dragonhawk and Gryphon. I find this to be a very expensive upgrade for what it does. 150 gold gives 30 health to Knights, Hawks, and Gryphons. When I have 1 to 5 Knights, I don't feel like spending 150 gold for just 30 health, taking them from 392 to 422. I think that's expensive. Once you have more than 5, sure. Knights have very high damage. They do, I think the best part about Knights is that they have Sundering Blades and they have a high natural attack speed and damage. They are cheap, they're fast, they have high armor, but they have kind of low health for a tier 3 tank. So The best part about Knights is the fact that they exist, that they are a tier 3 tank, you need it, and that they kill Mountain Giants. They do quite well against Mountain Giants. Next up, the middle slot on the final pick draft. Hippogryph, Bat, Destroyer, and Tank. Well, I think Destroyer is the best. It is flying, splash damage, buff stealing, self-healing, huge damage when it has mana, a flying unit that just annihilates backlines. I think Destroyers are amazing. They also don't get countered by Aerial Shackles and by Druids of the Talon, which are 2 AA options. I think they're great. Next best, I think, is Siege Tank. Oh, they're magic immune, yeah. Next best is Siege Tank. I think you could argue Siege Tank being better. Keep in mind all of this, right? There's a situational advantage where Banshees are better than Dryads. Hippos better than Priests. I don't think Shades will ever be better than Kodo, but you know, there's a place for everybody. I'm not saying this is always universally the way you should pick. There's strategies revolving around every unit. I think it's quite easy to see that tanks can be better than destroyers sometimes. Tank has a siege attack that does work on units, unlike in one-on-one melee. That means that they do very well against Huntresses, but ironically Huntress also do pretty okay against tanks when they are not directly the attack target. With their normal bouncing attack, Huntress behind a mountain giant can destroy tanks, but tanks will destroy Huntress and Dryads and Shamans, obviously, because of the armor types. Fortified armor, surprisingly low health, only somewhere in the range of 350 or so, whereas, you know, this is 500 plus, 600 plus, 600 plus is 300 plus. But with fortified armor, it's taking massively reduced damage from almost everything. The only thing it doesn't take reduced damage from is Siege, where it takes amplified damage, which also, by the way, includes Raiders. In addition to these 4 long-range Siege units, Raiders destroy tanks, also take reduced damage from tanks. It's very niche, but you could add Raiders if you're up against a tank player. Tank can, of course, be a tank unit. Outside of these 4, they can't get possessed. They do take damage from Shockwave and Carrion Swarm, but not from Disease Cloud, for instance. But they also can't get healed, they can't get bloodlusted, they can't get frenzied, but they can be inner fired and roared. Tanks also can get an upgrade called Barrage. Once you upgrade it, you cannot turn it off. You cannot revert back to its original form. Barrage implements an AI in tanks that says prioritize your anti-air attack whenever you can. Their anti-air attack is 6 piercing rockets. Their anti-ground is a single siege gun. So once you upgrade Barrage, they will seek to engage enemy air. Sometimes they will move small distances for it, even when they're blocked. So a tank can sometimes try to get around the Tauren to attack an enemy destroyer, even when there's not really space. And they start derping out like a StarCraft 1 Dragoon, which is the biggest insult in positioning AI I can give anyone. Y'all know the Dragoon. But overall, with all that, with some of the downsides, with some of the quirkiness, with sometimes that, they are an amazing anti-air unit, in particular because they will draw the aggro from a Frostworm and a Chimaera, and that means that any flying machines you got, any Zerkers, can then attack that Chimaera that's coming forward to attack the siege engine. You've got fortified armor tanking medium and piercing, and now you're attacking with your glass cannon to kill that air. It's an amazing combination, very good. Then you've got the Hippogryph Rider and the Batrider. Hippo Rider, 600 range. There's a cool thing here about Hippo Rider. Archers are 170 gold. Hippogriffs are 65 gold. And you can actually move them next to each other in the grid to mount the archer on top of the Hippo Rider. On top of the Hippo to become the Hippo Rider, which is 235 gold, which is the sum of its parts. If you start a game with 10 archers and you get to tier 3, you can make 10 hippos. You can then put the archers on the hippos, and before your wave spawns, you can sell all of them for the full price. Normally, you can sell units only for the full price if you haven't used them in battle yet. Otherwise, it's 75% gold return. But the archer on the hippo becomes a new unit, and then before the wave spawns, it hasn't fought yet. Yes, the 10 archers have fought, but they're no longer who they were. So you can then sell 10 hippo riders and suddenly go full torrents or full destroyers, right? Opening with archers and then picking hippos gives you a money rebate functionality, that otherwise can never be achieved. That's pretty cool. The other part of it is that you do keep the Hippo Riders, but now they're in the air and they have way more health, and it means they're not going to get taken out by Flame Strike anymore, or by Shockwave, which is pretty cool. What to say about Hippo Rider? It's a fast attacking air unit, pretty tanky, 600 range. With such range, 600, you should see it as a sniping unit, where from very far away it can engage enemy rifles at equal range, but because air units are allowed to blob up more and move better, you could have multiple Hippo Riders fighting a single rifle from an angle, which means that you're not facing the full fire of all those rifles. So while Hippo Rider surely is no Frostworm or Chimaera, it's a very useful air unit that is all-purpose, can be built from separate parts or can be built by itself. It doesn't need to upgrade improved bows and marksmanship, but overall it's a respectable damage unit that doesn't have the devastating effect of a Frostworm or Chimaera, doesn't have the devastating cost either, but can be a very strong unit anyway. You can definitely make this a key unit that you win games with it. 6 to 8 Hippo Riders with Bloodlust and Frenzy and Inner Fire and Kodo can just wreck backlines. You'll be surprised to see how much damage they can do. Then we get to the final Ultimate Air unit. Well, I say Ultimate Air, but that's kind of a lie. Ultimate Air Frostworm? Check. Come on in. You know, this is a club where we only allow hotties. Right? You gotta be a hottie to get in. You're a hot air unit? Yeah, come on in. Come on in. Hold up. I'm sorry, we don't accept your kind here. No. No, it's your dress code. There's something wrong with your dress code. No, you're not heavy air, right? You're not a hottie. Gryphon Rider? Okay, you're with them? Alright, fine. You're with them, right? But the Wyvern, no, sorry. You can't go here. Have you tried the other place across the... They have a... You know, anyway, so let's talk about this unit. Frostworm, general all-purpose unit, can attack air and ground. It shuts down buildings with an upgrade, and it does a slow effect in movement and attack rate on enemies. This is the carrier of Warcraft 3, or the battle cruiser, I can say, right? Either the battle cruiser or the carrier. When you make enough of these, they can sometimes wipe away whatever they face. They can wipe away their own counters. They have enough health to survive a shackle. They have enough health and damage to actually go head-to-head with the siege tanks. They can kill enemy wyverns, certain griffins, and because they can deal with a lot of different things, they're kind of an ultimate unit. They will get countered by cost by certain units, but they're super solid. I like them a lot. Are they better than Chimaera against ground? No, because the Chimaera is specialized. All of their power balance is focused on ground. They can only attack ground, and Chimaera have more splash. They both have splash, but the Chimaera has more splash. I really like combining Chimaera with web or ensnare, and I like combining them with siege tanks. Why? Why are these synergies? Well, Weapon Raider brings them to the ground, enemy air units, so Chimaeras can now attack everything. Secondly, Chimaeras get countered hard by any enemy air that attacks air, such as Gargs, Talons, Hippogryphs. All of those 3 units lose hard to siege tank. So if you have enough Chimaeras, even though they are losing to enemy dedicated anti-air, the presence of siege tank in your army, together with Chimaera, is heavily punishing those units, just destroying them. So I think Chimaera is great in groups. I usually don't invest going into mass Chimaera without also having a good answer to their counter. I think they're very strong. They're not as generalist pickable, but by the time you pick your Chimaera, you already know your entire draft for the rest. So let's do a thought experiment. Let's say that this top list that you see here is everything else I have. Grunt, Zerker, Dryad, Priest, Druid, Statue, Wagon, Kodo, Mountain Giant, Destroyer, and Chimaera. Would I go Chimaera here? I don't think so. Right? Because I don't have any way to protect them from enemy air. As much as all of these are my top picks, I actually don't think I like all of these together with each other. They are my most preferred, but I don't want this entire list together. So I would not even be excited about Chimaera in this list. I'd be much more excited about Chimaera in this list. look, I've got a Gargoyle and a Siege Tank that can protect my Chimaera from enemy air. And Talon. So I think this is also where they belong. Not just because it looks good in this list, but I think Chimaera is second because of its situationalness. But I'll often pick Chimaera over Frostworm if all other things were equal, so long as I have some dedicated anti-air. I'm going to put Frostworm on top. I'm going to put Gryphon in third. Gryphon is... It has a cleave like Glaive Thrower, a vertical cleave. It hits behind the initial target, but it does good damage. Where the Frostworm has 100 magic damage, Gryphon only does 50. Well, that's a lot less than the Frostworm. And of course its cast is lower as well. I think Gryphons are alright, but yeah, they're just, they're not as hot as Frostworm and Chimaera. They're pretty good in big numbers. They're pretty spammable because they're a bit cheaper. You do need the Animal War training and the Stormhammer upgrade, which I find pretty debilitating because I can make one Frostworm for 435 gold. But if I go for a Gryphon, how much is the Gryphon? It's 260, right? Does anyone know the exact cost of the Gryphon? I know Frostworm is 435. The Gryphon is 260. But now I also need Stormhammers and Animal War training. So the first Gryphon actually costs 100 gold more than the first Frostworm. Oh, Worm is 440? Okay, Worm is 440. Where's the Batrider? Oh, the Batrider. Yeah, we'll talk about the Bat in a sec. So the first Gryphon costs 95 gold more than the Frostworm because of Stormhammer and Animal War training. And it takes a while for you to say that the value that you get out of the Gryphon is equal to the Frostworm. And I'm rating the Frost Breath as an unimportant upgrade. It only matters once you're on the enemy fort. So one Worm does so much more than 1 or 2 Gryphons for its cast. And just for this reason, I like it a lot more, the Worm, and in general. But Gryphons are respectable. Not so much the Wyvern, not respectable. Wyvern is this, it's a pretender. It's not really a capital ship like the Carrier and the Battlecruiser. It's not a heavy hitting unit. You know, it costs a little bit more than the Hyppogryph Rider. It has 50 range less, so it's gonna get... Well, let's just go with the number of units that get destroyed. That the Wyvern gets destroyed by. It will lose to Headhunters, Rifles, Archers, Fiends, Talons, Gargoyles, Hippos, Flying Machines, Dragonhawks, Batriders. It will probably beat Frostworms though. They do piercing damage with Venom. Frostworms are slow attackers. Wyverns can fight Frostworms. They can fight Gryphons kind of. They can fight Destroyers. They will kill Faerie Dragon. Very brave. You killed a Faerie Dragon. Good job. Yeah. I make Wyverns and I lose games just like Raiders. You make Wyverns or Raiders, you lose games. But, and this is the hard part, I've seen Wyverns win games sometimes, but I think it's like a situational late game ad. I've also crushed Wyvern armies really, really easily with, you know, if I have dedicated anti-air. I think you can only make Wyverns if you know your entire enemy draft, you know they don't have any answers to it, and you do it late, you add them late, and you've got all the other parts of your draft working out already. They're never going to save you in a normal situation. It's very specific. It's some kind of counter pick that sometimes works. The only 2 units we didn't talk about yet are the Faerie Dragon and the Batrider. The Faerie Dragon, I wanted to mention, does small piercing attack damage, and it phases out of existence once when it gets attacked, which is neat. But the main reason you get it is Mana Flare, which does a reactive counter damage to anyone that casts spells. So anyone that casts spells, once a second, the flare can lash out to them and do a reactive explosive damage that hits everyone else that has mana around the target. And so Faerie Dragons can completely shut down Shamans, Necromancers. They can do great against Talons, Spirit Walkers, Witch Doctors, Sorceress, Banshee. Very, very solid. And they do decent against heroes. The fact that you can make 1, 2, or 3 and shut down certain things is amazing. I love this unit. I love it a little bit less than the Kodo, but it's great. And then there's the Batrider in the penultimate pick list. Basically, it has been given 600 range. So unlike the 300 range it has in 101 melee, This allows it to kind of stay back and not die too easily to some units. Theoretically, the bat could be attacking a berserker without getting attacked back, because the bat's ally, the Abomination, is nearer the berserker. So that's pretty solid. Basically, the bat will not fly past enemy armies in order to try and explode on the next player, because he'll be held back via his own anti-ground attack. This anti-ground attack is very tiny. He won't be winning any battles, but it's just more of a let's keep it back kind of mechanic. And then it will have a search radius that I feel is about 700 range, where it will engage and fly and explode on enemy air. And I think it's super useful to have. If I don't get offered any other dedicated anti-air, such as Garg, Hippo, Talon, Flying Machine, Siege Tank, or Dragonhawk, and I get to the final pick list, and I'm being offered either Hippo Rider or Bat, I may pick Bat over the Hippo Rider, just because I'm like, hey, you know, I can deal with 6 enemy Wyverns, or, you know, 5 enemy Gryphons via the Batrider. I think it's an okay pick, but it's a super counter pick and doesn't really build your own proactive army as much. It's just a counter unit. And I think a proactive army building unit is more valuable. So there you have it. That's my priority of pick list in Direct Strike. The important thing to remember is that every unit can be used, and I hope that with this little informal ranking session per draft pick order, maybe you've learned a little bit about some different units and how I value them and how they kind of work together and have synergies with other units, and maybe learn something about the AI targeting systems in Warcraft 3. Hope you enjoyed it. If you made it this far, make sure to hit the subscribe button. There will be more Warcraft 3 tips for custom maps or for one-on-one melee. Sometimes I do commentary about gaming news or what have you. I'll be covering thoughts here about games and life in general, and lots of Warcraft 3. All right, see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.